Well, let's talk about Daniel as a whole first.
Okay.
Because we've talked about Bel and the Dragon, but I
Yeah.
think we used the beginning of that episode to introduce the idea of the Apocrypha, and we haven't
Mhm.
introduced the book of Daniel yet.
No, we have
So
not.
let's talk about the book of Daniel.
Yeah. Why
Uh,
did he get a whole book?
did he get a whole book though? Because he's hardly even mentioned in this chapter.
I
He
know, but
got
it's named after him.
so it's named after the character of Daniel, who's exiled from Judah,
Hmm.
taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, trained in Babylonian divination, and then gets this reputation for wisdom. And I think, like looking at the Bible, if you look at the Christian Bible, Daniel is placed in the prophets area. It's
Hmm.
intermixed between all the prophets, whereas in the Jewish canon, it's in between Esther and Ezra in
Hmm.
the Ketuvim or the writings.
Okay.
So modern Christians usually consider Daniel to be a prophet. Modern Jews don't. Um, and so, like, if we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's interesting because the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is Jewish writing, did put Daniel within the prophetic literature.
Yeah.
So there's different contentions between historically where to place Daniel, and then because so much of the New Testament kind of draws on Daniel as prophetic literature, some think that early rabbinic sources or early rabbis were trying to distance that interpretation, that Christian lens being
Hmm.
forced onto Daniel, and so they moved it around from the prophetic area and placed it more in the Ketuvim in the writings. And then also because Daniel is such a late writing, so much later than all of the other prophets, it would also make sense to have Daniel not within all the prophets area. So that's why there's two differing ideas on where Daniel exists within the broader scheme. The Protestant canon, the Book of Daniel is going to be 12 chapters, but then we have like the Catholic and Orthodox canon, which adds stories such as Bel and the Dragon, Susanna, and the prayer to Azariah. So that's going to be 15 chapters in the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, 12 in the Protestant traditions. Well, I mean, not necessarily 15 chapters because like these stories are kind of sometimes intermixed in the Book of Daniel. As for the composition of Daniel, it likely grew incrementally, not by a single author. Some scholars think it was a single author, but for the most part, scholars agree that it was written separately and kind of put together, perhaps influenced by the Daniel character in Ezekiel, and then used as like recreated, like not really like
Yeah.
having like influence from that, but like having that as like a starting point.
So like
Um,
inspo, he was
yeah, a
just
little
like,
inspo, like, hey, that's a cool name. We like that. So we get chapters 2 through 6, which are
mhm.
written in Aramaic, which
Okay.
is interesting because when we talk about the Hebrew Bible,
Yeah.
one of my points of contentions with calling it the Hebrew Bible is, well, not all of it is written in Hebrew.
Yeah.
Uh, but still, we call it the Hebrew Bible because that's what we do. The first 7 chapters are kind of like this one part that works with, and chapters 1 was probably originally written in Aramaic and
Mhm.
then translated into Hebrew, to kind of make like a nice beginning and ending for the story, to like start in Hebrew, have the little court tales in Aramaic, and then end in Hebrew.
Mhm.
But we get the middle chapters 2 through 6, 2 through 7, the first few chapters,
Okay.
which are these kind of court tales, stories, independent stories of Daniel and his friends doing things. And each story kind of acts as a standalone and it was kind of edited together to make it more of a cohesive story, kind of, where we
Yeah.
see the like somewhat growth of Nebuchadnezzar as the
Mhm.
story goes on.
Okay.
So yeah, so those stories were likely collected. Chapters 1 and 7 were added later, and then even later, chapters 8 through 12 were added on.